What's depressing? I'm Mr. Beat. Well, I'll tell you what's depressing. We're still in a pandemic. It's a global public health crisis, and millions have died from COVID-19 over the past year. But there's also been a terrible economic crisis. Most of the world has been in a serious recession. What the heck do you want? Aren't you going to define what a recession is? I hadn't planned on it. I think most of my audience already knows what a recession is. Well, you said most, so clearly not everyone knows. You gotta define it, man. Okay, fine. A recession is a period when the economy stops growing. You happy? Most economists say a recession is when the gross domestic product, or GDP, shrinks for 2 quarters. Oh, and GDP is the total value of all final goods and services produced in a country over a period of time. The economy should generally always be growing as long as the population is growing, as it is assumed that productivity should be going up as more people are alive to produce. So when it's not, yeah, that's bad. During recessions, people stop buying stuff, so companies stop producing stuff, so they lose money and have to fire workers. Well, this leads to higher unemployment, lower income, and even less people buying stuff. This all leads to a vicious cycle. Well, if people aren't spending their money, then companies aren't making money. And if companies aren't making money, then they have to fire workers. And then workers without a job, they're not making money, so they're not spending money. And if they're not spending money, then the companies lose money. And if the companies lose money, then they have to fire their workers. And if the workers are fired, they don't have money, so they're not spending their money. And so if people aren't spending their money, then companies don't have money. And so they have to fire more workers, and then more workers don't have money.
And there are even more people who can't afford to spend their money. And even if more people can't spend their money, then now these companies, they're not making any money, so they may have to shut down, they're going bankrupt, and then next thing you know, everybody has no money.
It goes on and goes on and goes on and goes on. Anyway, economists say the current COVID-19 recession is the worst global economic crisis since the Great Depression. The Great Depression, in fact, may indeed be the worst global economic crisis in modern world history, lasting from 1929 to around 1939, but maybe longer. It had devastating effects. International trade declined by more than 65%. A third of all banks failed. Economic output went down by 25%. Unemployment in the United States got as high as 25%, and even as high as 33% in other countries. Housing prices went down 67%. Tens of millions of people lost all their wealth. Literally, all of it. Imagine being a 60-year-old man and building up wealth your entire life, working your butt off, only to see all of it gone. And you have to start all over from scratch. Tens of millions found themselves in this position. Anyway, long story really short. Ever since the Great Depression, governments around the world have been much more involved with trying to rescue economies and give direct aid to citizens to cope during recessions. But what caused the Great Depression? I mean, we know what caused the current COVID-19 recession. It's in the name, COVID-19.
COVID-19!
COVID-19!
It's more cut and dry. But the Great Depression is more complicated. Historians and economists have debated what really caused the Great Depression for decades. The debate is usually between the folks who favor a more limited government when it comes to the economy and the folks who favor a government more involved with the economy. You know what? That kind of sounds like pretty much every debate in modern history. Anyway, when I searched causes of the Great Depression on YouTube, these 3 videos pop up. Let's look at the YouTube channel Econclips first. It gives a perspective from what's known as the Austrian School of Economics, which generally is critical of government involvement in the economy and favors individualism and free markets. Another video that popped up when I searched causes of the Great Depression was the Crash Course US History video about the entire Great Depression. It was surprisingly more nuanced, looking at what caused the Great Depression, but still leans towards the narrative that the government wasn't to blame as much as the dang free market was, and the irrational behavior of individuals. This is the more mainstream, quote, Keynesian perspective. Keynesian economics, named after a dude named John Maynard Keynes, who first popularized these ideas, generally is all about doing whatever you can to increase the aggregate demand, or total demand, and that some sometimes markets can mess up aggregate demand, so government and/or central banking has to come in and fix it. The third video that popped up is from an old friend, Robert, from Reading Through History. This video is probably the least biased of the three, but I feel like he focuses too much on the stock market crashes of October 1929, which were probably more symptoms than causes of the Great Depression. My point for bringing up all those different perspectives is our political biases often strongly influence what we believe caused the Great Depression. After scouring as many different sources as possible over the years, I have compiled one giant list of 18 possible causes of the Great Depression, and here they are. You get all that? Excellent. Great. Groovy. No, most of that does not make any sense to them. Are you insulting my audience? No, it's just a confusing list for anyone who's not an economist. Fair enough. Okay, buddy, let's break this down. Let's simplify this. While all of those causes are correct to a certain degree, some are less credible than others. Plus, some of these can be combined and are definitely related. And I do get that this list might be overwhelming, especially if you're in 8th grade American history class watching this right now. And so I come up with another top 5 list, baby. Woo! Heck yeah, let's do this. Here are the top 5 causes of the Great Depression, counting down from the least biggest cause to the biggest cause. Number 5, an unstable banking system. Between 1930 and 1933 alone, around 9,000 banks failed in the United States.
Hey, Eddie, you got any money in the bank? You better hurry.
George, this is a pickle.
All right, now what happened? How did it start?
Well, how does a thing like this ever start? All I know is the bank called our loan.
When?
About an hour ago, I handed over all our cash.
All of it?
Every cent of it, and still was less than we owed them.
Holy mackerel.
And then I got scared, George, and closed the doors.
I was just talking to old man Potter, and he's guaranteed cash payments to the bank. The bank's going to reopen next week.
But, George, I got my money here.
Did he guarantee this place?
Well, no, Charlie, I didn't even ask him. We don't need Potter over here.
And I'll take mine now.
No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
I got $242 in here, and $242 isn't going to break anybody.
Because banks hold just a fraction of the value of their customers' deposits in the form of reserves, any sudden surprise attempt to convert deposits into cash can leave banks short of reserves. Now, usually banks can just borrow extra reserves from other banks or from the Federal Reserve Bank, the central bank of the United States. However, many banks couldn't or wouldn't borrow from the Federal Reserve because they either lacked good enough collateral or didn't belong to the Federal Reserve System. Bank deposits would be greater than the value of their assets. And this led to banks failing. Oh, and in the early 1930s, there was no such thing as deposit insurance. If a bank failed, you lost all your money you had in the bank. This led to some bank panics in which depositors pulled all their funds for fear that they might lose all of them if the bank failed, which in turn only made the problem freaking worse. More and more banks failed because of it. Number 4, asset bubbles. First of all, an asset is any owned resource that has value with the expectation that it will have a future benefit. An asset bubble is when asset prices rise to unrealistic levels in a short amount of time, meaning the assets aren't really worth that much, yo. They be inflated, you know, like a bubble. This happened quite a bit during the 1920s. The stock market is a perfect example of this. Many forget that there was also quite a real estate bubble during that time, and much of that was due to easy access to credit, meaning it was easy for folks to borrow lots of money. But we'll get to that more here in a bit. Number 3, increasing tariffs and other taxes when people were struggling. Look, I get why President Herbert Hoover raised tariffs and taxes in those early years of the Great Depression. He raised taxes to try to balance the budget during a time when the economy was contracting. This was when we were still on the gold standard, okay? He signed the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act to boost falling agriculture prices, which had been crippling farmers for years.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
Yeah, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act is one of the worst laws in American history. It led to trading partners retaliating by raising their tariff rates and ultimately froze international trade, causing companies' sales to drop everywhere. Basically, raising taxes of any kind during a recession is one of the worst things you can possibly do. And fortunately, since then, governments have learned not to repeat the same mistakes. Number 2, too much money supply in the 1920s and too little in the 1930s. Both the Austrian school folks and Keynesian folks agree that the Federal Reserve deserves at least some of the blame for the Great Depression. Well, I think it deserves a lot of the blame. First of all, during the 1920s, it implemented an easy credit policy. It expanded the money supply. It gave too much money to banks, which in turn gave too much money to companies and consumers. This policy led to an unsustainable credit-driven boom and therefore an asset bubble. Remember that? We mentioned that earlier. And then, in the early years of the Great Depression, particularly 1930 to 1932, the Federal Reserve did not help the banks suffering from bank runs. It contracted the money supply exactly when it shouldn't have. Sure, it was trying to preserve the value of the dollar, with the dollar still being tied to the value of gold, but we now know that did much more harm than good. And this last one is related to number 2, of course. Number 1, too much credit in the 1920s and too little credit in the 1930s. It's well known that the expansion of credit, buy now, pay later, got a little out of control during the 1920s. For the first time, millions of Americans were buying stuff with money they didn't have, but simply borrowed. They were buying new appliances, radios, cars, and other stuff using installment plans, paying a small percentage down, and the rest over a period of months or years. By the end of the 1920s, 80% of radios and 60% of cars were paid for on credit. Americans even bought stock using borrowed money, for crying out loud. This practice was called buying on margin. All this buying on easy credit also led to the aforementioned asset bubbles. But then, once the Great Depression started, there was an overreaction. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates when they probably should have lowered them. There was a credit crunch, meaning it was hard to borrow to invest in new ventures that would lead to economic growth. So there was less investment, which led to lower consumption, which led to lower production, and thus lower wages, and thus decreased demand, and even lower prices, and economists, by the way, call this a deflationary spiral. These credit crunches led to lots of bankruptcies during the Great Depression. So ever since, economists have constantly been trying to find that balance. And as we saw with the Great Recession of 2008, that balance was off quite a bit again in the years before it, as it felt like the 1920s. It's not an easy thing to figure out, even for the experts. So in conclusion, while there is no consensus among historians and economists regarding the exact causes of the Great Depression, perhaps this top 5 list will be a compromise to bring those monetarists in the Austrian school and Keynesians together. Because dang it, both sides are right to a certain degree, so congratulations to everyone. here is my monthly shout out to all of them who donate at least $10 or more to the channel each month. Starting with my biggest donors: Matt Standish, El Casper, Sean Conant, Nick Everett, Alicia Solberg, Andrew B., Cody Moore, Dr. Paul J. Lilly, Bradley Poole, John Johnson, Andrew Snyder, CJ Cavey, Kit Walker, Zachary F. Parker, Victor Martinez, Justin Emerson Richards, Southside Mitch, Lee Fortier, Thomas Oppenheim, Adam Rains, Kyler James Reinhart, Elon Capone, Cal Stevens, and the Geoscholar. Thank you all for donating, and thank you for watching.